What is going to be welcome to the Prize Picks Prop Show, bringing you a live edition here for this week's NFL Playoff Weekend Divisional Round picks here for you guys. I'm joined with Mr. Alex Blickle. Alex, how are we doing today?
Doing really well. Excited to talk prize picks. I know you guys have been cranking out the prize pick shows left and right lately. This is my first one, so really excited to get going.
Yeah, glad to have you here. Like you mentioned, we've been pumping out as many Prize Picks videos as we could, but this is gonna be the first one I've done live anyway. So it'll be cool to and also have a co-host here. So kind of not just gonna be talking to myself here. So good to have you. But we each have three picks for this weekend. We can kind of combine it and make our own little six pick
Yep.
flex play, which is good for 25x now, which is a cool little addition over at Prize Picks. But before we get started, if you're a new user over there, use code FTN. You'll see up top. Get a 100% match up to $100. No better way to build a bankroll than a free $100 there. So highly recommend doing that. But let's get into the picks here. We're not going to be here too long, so let's make it snappy here. Let's see who you have for pick number one. Where are you going for option number one?
Well, I've got a few options for the first one. I think I'll go with the Christian Kirk over 62.5 receiving yards prop as my first one, in part because I know that you have a Trevor Lawrence one, and obviously anyone who's been following my prize picks play over the last month and a half or so, I am all about the correlation, especially in NFL. And this is a number that I really like for Kirk. My only hesitation, ironically, is the fact that he had such a big game against Kansas City in their first matchup. So it's almost like, is Kansas City going to have a game plan specifically to funnel production away from him? I think that ultimately Kansas City is going to play the type of defense that they like to play, heavy man coverage, all this stuff that really Christian Kirk thrives in. So I like Kirk here. I love the game script, and I love the pace of this game more than anything else, particularly if Kansas City, who are heavily favored, jumps out to an early lead. The pace in that game should take off. It's projected as one of the fastest in our offensive efficiency tool. So I really like the opportunity for Kirk this week.
Yeah, I like that call quite a bit. My model has Kirk for around 70 yards this week, and like you mentioned, I have the Jaguars quarterback Trevor Lawrence. I have an over on him, so a big part that you've talked about over the last couple of weeks is correlation in these picks. So it's good to have that correlation. I think that's also very important. One line that you're not going to get on many sports books is the fantasy points line. I'm taking the over. Trevor Lawrence, 18 fantasy points. This is basically going to be like FanDuel scoring, so you don't get bonuses and all that stuff when you hit certain threshold like 300 yards. But regardless, I still have Trevor Lawrence for over 19 fantasy points this week. You mentioned the environment for this game, but I think even more so for the passing game, where they're already going to be more than a touchdown underdogs here in this spot, and we've seen the Jags a lot recently turn to the passing game quite often when they're down. So I think this is going to be a spot where the Jags are forced to throw. They're looking to throw early and often. I think that benefits Lawrence quite a bit here. So Trevor Lawrence over 18 fantasy points is my first pick of the week. So yeah, that's again not gonna be a line that you're gonna be able to find at other sports books with the fantasy score there. So again, this is something that you can really only get at Prize Picks. And then another thing is for a lot of these parlays that we are doing, you can't really pair up players, in very many books unless you're doing a same game parlay. So it's very important to utilize at Prize Picks. So take advantage of that while you can. But pick number two, Alex, where are you going?
Well, first, I wanted to ask you, how do you pick between fantasy points, pass yards, prop? Because I like pairing Christian Kirk's 62.5 receiving yards, maybe with Trevor Lawrence's 245.5 pass yards, a little more. So I'm curious how
Yeah.
you make that decision.
Yeah, I think that would definitely be a more natural pairing. Just from my projections, though, the odds of him going over his fantasy points were greater than the passing yards.
Mhm.
Let me check his passing yards real quick. I'll pull that projection up, but I'm pretty sure I do have him over that number as well. I'd be pretty surprised if he wasn't considering the fantasy point there. But yeah, I have him for 255 passing yards, but I also like his odds to not necessarily score a rushing touchdown
Mhm.
frequently, but he's been doing that at times. I have him for right around 20 rushing yards, about 25% chance to score on the ground. So I think when you can consider all those things, the fantasy score just made more sense. And then, but obviously, if it were if I was creating my own kind of on off the rip, it'd probably be more of a natural pairing to
Mhm.
consider the passing yards for sure.
Yep. I like that. My second one, I'm also going to go to a fantasy points prop. This is probably my favorite individual prop of the week. Jarek McKinnon over 12 fantasy score. And for me here, it's all of the different paths to hitting this. Like I would almost not be surprised if he hits this 12 fantasy point number just through the PPR points for receptions and receiving yards. Then I also think because it's the playoffs, they're going to want him on the field a little more. So maybe he gets a higher share of the rushing yards. He's been scoring touchdowns like crazy, especially because how much they love him on the field and how good he is at ad-libbing when Patrick Mahomes gets outside of the pocket and does his thing. So I love the touchdown equity. He just has so many different ways to get to this 12 fantasy point number. It's absolutely my favorite of the week.
Yeah, I like that call. Like you mentioned, Mahomes has been able to find him in some definitely off script plays where last time we saw him there, week 18, he's running to his left, looks like he's about to get tackled, or just running in and he flips it over
Mm-hmm.
to McKinnon. So they've definitely had a connection there. That is for sure. So I like that call as well. I'm gonna go to a play that you might like yourself, being a Mr. Philly fan.
Yeah.
I like that Jalen Hurts over 8.5 rush attempts in this spot against the Giants here. He's gone over this number in 3 of his last 4. And basically, what we're counting on here is Jalen Hurts just getting back to that normal sort of role that he had prior to the injury. And based on what we saw from him last time out, really no doubts on that. I'm projected for over 11 rush attempts this week. I also have him for over 56 rushing yards, and his rushing prop is 50.5. So if you wanted to take his rushing yard prop, you could do that as well. But for me personally, I feel more comfortable with this rushing attempt. You don't have to worry about him going backwards. You don't have to worry about actually the sneaks, or the sneaks will help, and also the kneel downs will actually help in
Yeah.
this scenario. So 8.5, I think, is a pretty low number for Jalen Hurts. I think they're going to use him quite a bit here, especially now we're in obviously must win territory with the playoffs. Jalen Hurts is their guy, and they're going to use him that way. So Jalen Hurts over 8.5 rush attempts is pick number 2 for me. Where you got to run us out with your picks?
I love the Hertz call. And I also really like the 24.5 fantasy point number for him.
Yep.
Same idea, just like the Hertz returning to who he's been all regular season, should be healthier than he was in his last start. And I would even say, like, I probably like that 8.5 carries more. But if you're going to correlate Hertz with, let's say, AJ Brown or something like that, now maybe you go over to the fantasy points. So that's probably how I'll play Hertz. Absolutely love that one as well. My last one is going to be Kadarius Toney over 6.5 fantasy points. Obviously, really benefits from Mecole Hardman being out again. I think he'll sort of have that Hardman role. We've seen how involved he is in the red zone. The big concern here is he hasn't been running a ton of routes, basically averaging around 10 routes per week. I'm kind of leaning on the fact that, I think that number is actually up now that we're in the playoffs. Like, I think he only ran 6 in their last game, but hey, they were up huge at halftime, kind of just resting him for the playoffs. And even when he's only on the field that little, he's being scripted high value touches within the red zone. We saw in their last game, like, he scores on a kind of screen pass type thing that gets called back, and then he scores anyway on a rushing play right after that. So we know he's going to be involved. Similar argument to McKinnon. There are so many paths for him to get there. It could be one red zone touch that he scores on. It could be a 20-yard run early in the game, followed by 2 receptions at any point in time. It could be one long reception. Lots of ways for him to get there. I always love the multiple pass. I think that increases the chance of it hitting. So I like Toney at 6.5 as well, which kind of sets us up really nicely. We've got Lawrence, we've got Kirk, and now 2 Chiefs. So we've got kind of a game stack, and that's the correlation we want.
Yeah, absolutely. So I like that call quite a bit. Obviously, keeping it in the same game. I think another reason why it benefits to have players from the same game. I think it's very natural to say, okay, if I have a quarterback and a receiver correlating, that's nice. But for a game that is in such a good environment, it makes sense to be looking at these overs. So I like that one quite a bit. Now I wanted to save this one for last because I have a feeling people aren't going to like it. It's a very I guess, ugly name right now in the fantasy industry, and it's Mr. Ezekiel Elliott. And I'm taking an over on Ezekiel Elliott. I never thought I'd be doing this. 34.5 is where the line comes in. It's a very, very low line. And I get it. The matchup is not good. He has not been good. And it's honestly been brutal for him the last 2 games. Now, week
Mhm.
18 against Washington, let's throw that one out the window. They were playing to win if they could, but it wasn't necessarily a must-win game for them. They were really just trying to see if they could potentially win and maybe slide up there in the seeding, but it didn't really happen. And last week, obviously, very ugly game where they didn't really use him a whole lot. And he still had 13 carries, and he still played over 40% of the snaps, and
Mhm.
only turned it into 27 yards. That's a very, very bad game. Now, could that just be what we get out of Zeke now? The 2 yards per carry? I guess, sure, it's possible. But in terms of if he goes out there and gets 13 carries again, is he going to go over this 34.5 number? I would say probably. Like, it doesn't really take a whole lot of efficiency to get over this number. When you look at what he's done this season, and I know things have kind of progressed more so for Tony Pollard, and I think you could probably say he's the alpha in this backfield now after he got more carries and more snaps last week. But he's had 37 or more rushing yards in every game except for the last two. And I get the last two are sort of important because they're maybe telling us a little bit of a story about where Tony Pollard is right now. But the key factor here is just this line is very low. And I get it. The matchup is also terrible. San Francisco probably has the best defense in the NFL. They've been very good against the run. But I'm going to bank on the Cowboys just still wanting to use Zeke at least enough to make him viable here in this spot. I have him for, I think, 12 carries this week. So it's nothing crazy. And it's not like I have him going over this number by much. It's right around 48 yards, I believe, 46 yards. I have him for 12 carries and 46 yards. But it's just such a low number for a guy who is going to get work. Like, there's just no way around it, even though he's been bad and even though people don't like him and Tony Pollard is better, like, he's still going to get the ball. It's just that simple. He's probably going to see double digit carries once again here. And it could be a script where, the game is just sort of slow and ugly. Both two really good defenses here. The Vegas implied totals tell us a similar story. It's a 3-point spread and a 45.5 point total. So if it's a game where both teams are running the ball a ton and not really punching each other a whole lot in terms of points, it could be a spot where Zeke gets 12 to 14 carries. And if that's the case, I think that he goes over this number at 34.5 on PrizePicks, which brings me to another strategy is shopping around for lines. Like, I think a
Mhm.
big thing is, you look at other books and you'll see a line on, let's say, DraftKings that's, you know, 2 or 3 yards higher than it is on Prize Picks, or you look for a number like a catch prop, for example. Like, for example, Jamar Chase last week, he had a 6.5 catch prop that was plus money. He was bumped down to 6 on Prize Picks, but in an alternate sort of world, I guess, on Prize Picks, you'll have someone who's an over 4.5 line that's like minus 170, and they sit at 4.5 on PrizePicks. Those are the numbers that I like to look at and attack because it shows that they're favorites to go over that number based on the juice that you're seeing on the lines, and you don't have to worry about that on PrizePicks. There are no lines. It's simply you put in however many picks you want, and you get a multiplier based on however many picks or whatever sort of fashion you want to do it. So that's another strategy that I really want to touch on there. So for Ezekiel Elliott, he's at 37.5, 38.5. He was yesterday when I put in this pick on some sports books. So again, it's a 3 yard difference. Might not seem like a whole lot, but hey, if he gets 36, 35 yards, you'll realize that it feels like a whole
Yep.
lot. So those are my 3 picks. Going to round it out with a nasty one with Mr. Zeke Elliott. But Alex, anything else you want to touch on here before we get out of here?
I think one last thing is the 6 pick flex plays have such a phenomenal payout that
Yeah.
let's say you have 5 picks you really like, it still makes sense to add in a sixth, and maybe you do two of them then. And I really like the Pollard over 12.5 fantasy points, where Pollard and Zeke could both get there if you're using the Pollard fantasy points and the Zeke rushing yards. I do think that rushing yards number is too low for Zeke, as you said. So maybe in one entry you go Pollard over 12.5 fantasy points, and the other you go Zeke over his rushing yards. Maybe they both hit, but the chances that at least one hit are really, really high.
Yeah, I like that call. And then I guess I'll throw another one out there as well in case we want some alternatives because I did have another one that I was very close to taking there, and it's not in any of the games that we've talked about, and it's Josh Allen over 34.5 pass attempts. If you are a believer this game stays close and it's one where the Bills are forced to kind of keep going, which I am, I know it's a 6 point spread here, but based on the way we saw these two in the first quarter last time they saw each other, I think this game is going to be a good one. I think it's going to be a very intriguing game from a fantasy and betting perspective. So I like Josh Allen over 34.5. So there's a little bit of extras there, two honorable mentions as well with the Tony Pollard and the Josh Allen plays. But I think that's going to do it for us. We appreciate you guys for tuning in. Good luck with all your picks. Let us know in the comments below who you guys are either tailing, who are some of your favorite picks of the week. Very curious to see where you guys are going for this week's divisional round. And before we do get out of here, check out the flash sale that we did. Actually, that one expired, but we do have another sale going on that we don't have a banner for. But you can use that code FTN up top to get a 10% match, a 100% match up to $100. You can use code FTN TV to get 20% off your FTN packages. But that's going to do it for us. We will see you guys next time. And as always, good luck, everybody.